Yeah, I just got a notification that we're broadcasting. So.
Okay. Okay, we're up and good to go.
Cool. So for those of you that are jumping on, we'll be starting in just a few minutes.
We've got 1 minute before 6. Okay, I'm starting the webinar now. You're muted, Patricia.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. We'll probably just hold tight here for just a minute as folks are joining us on the program. And apologies again that we are not able to be in person. We were hoping very much that we would be back to our usual routine of meeting at the Historic Paint Factory and having a little time to socialize and network before our talks. And we started realizing last week that wasn't probably going to be possible. So we are glad that we could still hold this evening, even though it is virtual. So thank you all for joining us. And this, of course, is our first preservation conversation of 2022. We are very pleased to have Dr. Sonia Tuji with us tonight to present Documenting the Frontiers, Jean-Bernard Bousseau's Among the Quapaw Indians. I'm Patricia Blick, Executive Director of the QQA, and I'm joined by Shelley Stormo, our Membership and Events Coordinator. I'd like to thank our donors as well as our corporate and individual members. We are able to hold our educational programs with your support. You can find a list of our corporate members on our website at quapaw.com. Also, I'd like to recognize our QQA Education Committee. Ann Ballard-Bryan is our Vice President of Education and is working with Cecil Innett, Antonio Figueroa, Kenya Eddings, and Amber Hogan. We think we have a great preservation conversation calendar for this year. We mailed our calendars out in December. I'm going to hold one up. So hopefully you got one. If you did not receive one and you would like to receive one, please just send us a note to QQA@quapaw.com and we will drop one in the mail for you. We'd be happy to do that. We have several left. And also, I'll just mention the membership opportunities. If you're not a member of the QQA and you believe in our mission, preserving Greater Little Rock's historic places, we invite you to join and support the work that we do. Please go to quapaw.com to join for as little as $35 a year, or you can also make a donation at quapaw.com. Before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to let you know that we'll be taking your questions at the end of her talk. Please type your questions and comments in the chat section of Zoom or in the comment section of YouTube. Now on to tonight's preservation conversation. I am very pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Sonia Touji. Sonia Touji received her license, which is equivalent to a Bachelor of Arts in English Studies from the University of Tizi Ouzou, Algeria, and her master's degree from the Université de Maine in Le Mans, France, with a thesis that focused on school integration and affirmative action at the University of Arkansas. She worked on her doctorate in American Studies at the Université de Maine and a PhD in American History at the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville, in a joint program and graduated from both institutions in 2012. She joined the UCA faculty in the fall of 2012 and has taught several courses in her fields of expertise, including Frontiers and Borderlands, Arkansas History and the South, and Native Americans and the Westward Expansion. Her research specializes in the early encounters Native Americans and African identity in the frontiers, gender and intimacy, as well as slavery and captivity. Her publications include The Happiest Consequences, Sexual Unions and Frontier Survival of the French and Quapaws at the Arkansas Post, Change and Continuity, French and Indian Alliance in the Mississippi Valley after the Treaty of Paris, 1763, in Une Amérique Française, 1760 to 1860, and They Did All the Work Except Hunting, Women and Labor in Early Frontier Arkansas, and Arkansas Women, Their Lives and Times. I think there are many topics that we would enjoy hearing Dr. Touji present on. At this moment, I will turn it over to Dr. Touji. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and join me in welcoming her. All right, I'm going to let Dr. Touji take over the screen.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Yes, excellent. Thank you so much for having me, Patricia. It's a lovely evening. It's as we talked about earlier. Just a week ago, I was abroad. I was in Spain, so I would like to apologize for any Franglishing or Spanglishing that might happen during this presentation. Still a bit jet lagged. So, but this is really a nice time for me to get back to the scholarship, but also to the community. For this presentation, I would like to start with some sort of a historical context and historical approach to my project. And then we will zoom into Jean-Bernard Bossu, the man of the hour, and then circle back to the ideas about conservation and but also some controversy that involve Bossu, and some of you who are familiar with Bossu, you might know a little bit more about. So I'll start with the ropes of splendor. I'm not sure if we were in a face-to-face session, I would have asked for how many in the room who have been able to see these during the exhibition of 1995 here in Little Rock. Feel free to type in the comment section if you have actually been able to see these. But with this, I'll start with this context, and it's in January 1995, and an unprecedented exhibition of the Robes of Splendor in Little Rock brought the Quapaw Indians from all over the country to the lands of their ancestors, les pays des Arkansas, as referred to by the first French settlers. The Robe of Splendors are Quapaw painted deerskins offered as a gift to the French in the 18th century. And the robes returned to their native land for this exhibition for the very first time since then. And thanks to Buzz Arnold. In her speech, Grace Mary Goodigal, was the chair of the Quapaw tribe at that time. She declared, quote, "The tribe is excited at joining with our brothers, sisters, and friends from across the seas in France to reaffirm a friendly alliance made between our people in the 1700s in Southeast Arkansas." And like their competitors, the Spanish, the English, the French generally established excellent relations with the natives during the conquest of the New World. Some exceptions, of course, and thinking about the Natchez Massacre in 1720s. And historians usually cite a diplomatic talent that the French seem to have for this achievement. I doubted it just a little bit. I thought there might be a little bit more to the story. And so this is part of this traditional view of European and Native American encounters, the one based on this European perspective, what we call facing west, that saw conquered Native Americans subdued by the Europeans. This historian has changed the way we've approached Native American history, and that's Daniel Rector with his facing east approach. He urged historians to challenge this traditional view of European Native American encounter, the one based on European perspective. But facing east, he says, demands that we tell a different story. Okay, and for him, it happened actually at a conference in the early 1990s when he was in St. Louis. And as he looks at the gate to the west, when we are facing west, somewhere in the east, and we're facing west, what we see is opportunity, right? That's what the settlers saw. The gate to the west, to the opportunity, to new lands, to the unknown, to a new life, and all sorts of things. But he says if we stay on the other side of the arch and we are facing east, what we see is an invasion. What we see is newcomers, right? And what we see is people coming to take what was theirs, right? And so that's a little bit the approach here with the facing east versus the facing west approach. And so the rope here, and again, I'm sure because you've seen presentations about the Quapaw Indians, I'm sure you recognize the Three Villages rope, for instance. This is one instance where the story of the Quapaw and the French struggle in the Mississippi Valley against their enemies, and so this shows a raid that was done, we believe, in either 1736 or 1740, because this was the time when the Quapaws and the French on one side were struggling or were at war with the Chickasaws. And one of the things, let me see if this is going to work. Yes. So here's one side. That's the three Quapaw villages. And the Quapaws moving towards the French post right there. And on their way to the other side, to the Chickasaws. And this describes or depicts a victory, a celebration. And so the robe represents this celebration of a French Quapaw victory against the Chickasaws for once, right? Again, those of you who know that conflict, we know that the victories were mostly from the other side. And so a closer look at the rope, you see these arrows. Good things I could do this. So we see these arrows, these green arrows here, are showing a line that starts from the three Quapaw villages, going through the post, the European post, the Arkansas post, the French houses there, and then towards the enemy, right? And so the idea here is about the depiction of this alliance. In my previous work, I have argued that the geographical isolation, the geopolitical situation with the French and the Quapaw sharing the same enemies in the region have consolidated this relationship. And I argued that the two people used kinship, sexual intimacies, and intermarriages to both establish and strengthen diplomatic and military alliances. So to survive, in short, the Quapaw and the French settlers forged these social obligations that enabled them to survive on the frontiers. And these agreements were basically the beginning of this long friendship that Grace Mary Good Eagle was talking about in her speech in 1995. Okay. And this is that geopolitical situation that I was talking about. So you've got the Osage on one side, the Chickasaws on one side, and Choctaws as well, actually being the bigger, the stronger tribes, if you will, nations, if you will, versus the Arkansas here, right? The Quapaws and the French. And a lot of times my students mention, when the time I talk about the Osage, they're like, oh, the mean tribe, the mean ones. And then I tell them about how the Osage have 10,000, about 10,000 warriors. At that time, the Quapaws had maybe 250, right? And here we are again with another 10,000 with the Chickasaws or even more. And so we try to understand that during these frontier times, the numbers mattered. So it's not just about one nation being mean or good to the other. It's really about whether you can afford to go to war or you can't in terms of numbers. And that was the situation with the Quapaws and the French. Neither the French nor the Quapaws had the numbers to win against these enemies. And so their, again, chance of survival was to come together. So we have several instances, I'm going to read some quotes here, where we see French settlers and the Quapaw forming this military alliance, and how the French considered the Quapaw to be their strongest and most faithful allies in the lower Mississippi Valley. They launched attacks against the Chickasaws, I mentioned earlier, 1736, 1740. In fact, the chief of the Quapaw lost one of his sons and had another one wounded within one of these battles. And after the Natchez Massacre, 1729, Desperriers, who was the governor at that time, stressed the importance of the Quapaw, writing, quote, "They are so necessary for us that one cannot do much in their favor." Their attachment to the French kept the English from passing the Mississippi River after the Natchez Revolt, end of quote. And so, similarly, so that we're talking about this early 1720s, 1730s, and here we are by 1758, another governor, de Cavalierec, is reiterating this special French-Quapaw relationship that was so necessary and so important to the French. And it was during this time frame, during de Cavalierec's governance, that the man of the hour, Jean-Bernard Bossu, was traveling and obviously serving in the French military. So during the 1750s. We're going to be talking about 3 different trips, and I'm going to try to make it concise. But three different trips, and the first 2 trips happened in the 1750s. So who is Bossu? Who is Jean-Bernard Bossu? And I have a short bio, but I want to bring attention to how many historians are hesitant to build their scholarship on Bossu's narratives and letters. I remember when I was a student myself, the idea of using him as a source in my dissertation was a little bit uneasy, if we can use the term. And the idea was that we were not even sure if he actually traveled, if he was where he said he was, and if he saw or did the things he said he did. And so it's something that's just been hanging over this wonderful source, primary source for us to understand what happened during this time frame. Just a small bio, small facts that we know about Bossu. He was born September 29 in 1720 in Banyuls-les-Juifs in France, into a family of surgeons. In fact, his father has a booklet about health. But he chose to be a soldier as early as 1731. He joined La Dauphine regiment and distinguished himself during the siege of the Château de Queyras in eastern France, and this is 1744.
And he earned the title of lieutenant. But it was his position as captain a bit later that enabled this Bossu to take part a travel to the New World in 1751,
57, and the 3rd trip again in 1770, which is the most controversial one. That we'll circle back to that in a little bit. In August 1771, Bossu returned to Bordeaux, and he settled in that area, in that region of Bourgogne. He lived in Auxerre, then moved to Aisy-sur-Seine, where he spent some time with one of his nephews. He died in Montbard. So all of these are small villages, one next to the other, small towns, one next to the other. I've had a chance to visit one summer. So he died in Montbard in 1792. But recently, I'm talking about the last decade or so, Bossu received some attention in his region, including some conferences, and also there were a couple of streets that were actually named after him. One was in the small town of Talon, and the other one is in Banyuls-les-Juifs, where he was born. So all of this kind of made me or draw me towards this story and towards these troubles and the story of this man, Jean-Bernard Bossu. Now, thankfully, we have some records about Bossu, whether it's colonial records, military records, but a cross-reading, I guess, of these different sources does help us establish some facts about Bossu. Some not yet, but some very evident, reliable proof that he actually made it to the New World and been to some of the places he said he's been. And so these are pictures that I've taken, I believe, in 2014, maybe 2015, something like that. And this is in the archives of in Aix-en-Provence, les archives d'outre-mer. So it's basically colonial archives for the French. And that's Bossu's état de service. So it's basically his military record, and it's actually written by him because he was trying to ask for, I think, an additional pension. He was also asking for La Croix de Saint-Louis, so it's an honor. So he had to establish, or he had to give a record of what he had done while in the military. And again, I remember a conversation with Buzz Arnold about this. It's like, yeah, he could not make up this stuff because a lot of it could be verified. And so this
is at least the beginning for me. And even a bit later, even during my research, other people were interested in the same same situation in terms of Bossu's and his whereabouts in Arkansas, but also in the Mississippi Valley. And so you'd find a combination, and this is just a partial timeline about Bossu's whereabouts in Louisiana. But this is again proof that Bossu's, at least the first two trips, as you can see, up until 1758, was here. And in terms of his travels, I will not bore you with much more details yet, unless you ask for it in the questions. But his travels and books are kind of one, because the first book, I'll have a picture in a second here. The first book represents the first two trips in the 1750s, and then the second book represents or depicts his travels in the 1770s, the third one, the third trip. And I promise I'm not trying to test your French here with this slide, but it's just a small summary of what he said during his very first visit to the Quapaws. So he departed. This is the very first trip. I'll give you a small context, or how he got to the Quapaws here. So Bossu departed l'Île de Ré in France on December 26, in 1750, among a group that was sent to reinforce the garrison at New Orleans. By mid-February 51, Bossu and the troops had arrived to Cap Francois in Santo Domingo. After a short stay, Bossu sailed to New Orleans March the 8th and reached his destination in early April. So early April 1751 is when he set foot in New Orleans. After that, he started
traveling along the Mississippi River, but he even traveled along the Arkansas River. And this is what he reported during this very first visit among the Quapaws. So he's talking about them, and Bossu has been influenced by what we would call the noble savage, the Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau's concept of the noble savage. And so he's talking about how brave they are fantastic swimmers, amazing amazing hunters, and how they are devout to the French. And he tells us a story about how he met this old guy who told him that he was there when LaSalle was there, and then he has this sentence right here that says that Arkansas is one of the most beautiful places in the world. And so I think if you talk to a New Yorker, they would say this guy is a liar. There's no way that a person who's been to Arkansas would say something like that. But just jokes aside, Bossu was received with festivities and dances, and smoked the calumet, which is something I'm sure you've seen with Joe Key's presentation and his work as well. So that's again Bossuet among the Quapaw, and these are the two books. As I mentioned, the first two books, L'Amérique occidentale and Nouveau voyage dans l'Amérique occidentale, published in 1768, and then the very last trip, published in 1777, Nouveau voyage dans l'Amérique septentrionale. So by the time Bossuet came back for this third trip, now this is so he went back to France and he came back. He had some troubles with the governor. I'm happy to go into more details during the question session. So by the time Bossuet came back, Arkansas is now part of the Spanish Empire after the Treaty of 1763. And what Bossuet is reporting here is how this kinship that was created by the social obligations that I mentioned earlier have sustained this French Quapaw relationship, even though the diplomatic ties have ended, right? So the diplomacy is over because that happens with governments, so it's gone. But it's those ties, it's those what we call the frontiers ties remained in place. And so he's telling us how the Quapaws, it was wonderful to see them preferring the French to the Spaniards, and there are actually some other narratives that more or less confirm what Bossuet was saying. Now, the resolved controversy. So a couple of things here about Bossuet and why historians are hesitant to use his work. So the first one is resolved, but by now between work that has been published. I showed you the military records earlier, but we also have some correspondence, colonial correspondence by Collerec that discusses Bossuet's demand to leave. This is in 57 due to sickness, to illness. So this is now resolved. By now we scholars agree that the first two trips happened, and there's so it's resolved. There's no doubt about it. The ongoing controversy is about the third visit, so the second book, right? And the reason for that is, as far as I know, we don't have much in terms of official records that establishes Bossuet being here. And that first line, for personal reasons, can help us understand that. So he came in initially as part of a regiment, as a soldier. So there are records, but for this third voyage, the third trip, he said it was a personal. He came back for personal reasons, and of course we can speculate what are these personal reasons. We know he's mentioned several times that he was asked by the Quapaw to take a wife. He never said whether he teases his audience in these letters, and he never said really whether he took a wife or not. Could that be a reason he came back? But at the same time, we do have a story of Laboussière, for example, Nicolas Laboussière, both in Kathleen Duval's book and Buzz Arnold's books. We see the story of this Frenchman who worked as an interpreter being incorporated into the Quapaw and possibly marrying into the chief's daughter. And so what Bossuet is referencing to here is a possibility. Now, it's whether we can establish this is up to now is not really a possibility. But that's where, to me,
his work is still valuable. Here's a controversy about the ropes that I mentioned earlier. There was a time where the ropes were, it was said that the ropes were not quappa, but they were plain Indians ropes. And thankfully, right, this French man, who, if we look again at the details, have transcribed the names of the 3 villages, and Arkansas right there, made that controversy go away. Thank God, right? And that's my question there. What if this wasn't there, right? How do we prove that these were quappa? So it's a little bit the same with Bossu. Just because we don't necessarily have the records showing he was here, we can't just completely ignore a whole book, right, of his travels and decide that it's fabricated, right? The whole book. There's always a possibility, but to me, that's the issue with the frontiers. Frontiers are messy. They are complicated because it's mostly about these relationships that Bossu is talking about, has experienced, that Laboussière or that French man that we don't know of, who transcribed the names of the villages on that deer scheme. So while I am cautious about the using and understanding this material, especially when it's lacking the context of Native American culture, especially when we come to gender questions, because these are French, European, but they are also males, right? So the perspective might be different. So I'm very cautious, but I'm welcoming also the idea of using this material just along the Native American stories, Native American records as well. And some of the records are stories rather than records. So I will just leave it here. I'm looking at the time. It's 35. Thank you so much for listening. But the idea here is really to continue the conversation with your questions. Thank you.
All right. If, oh, there she is.
Thank you very much. I am intrigued by a couple things. So I know we had a question pop up from Jim Metzger, but I'm going to ask you a couple other questions too as you were going through your presentation. I'm going to ask you, on the other side of it, has there been any collaboration or corroboration from the Native American side about him, or interaction, even if it's I don't want to say folklore, but oral history? I mean, is there anything that has reinforced his accounts of his exploration and interaction with the quapaw?
Not from the quapaw, and partly because, again, of records, right?
Right.
All of those were stories that could have been passed through generations, but we know how hard and how difficult.
Gotcha. Well, that's interesting. And also, I don't think that I was cognizant of the disparities between the Quapaw, the Chickasaw, and the Osage as far as the scale and the size of their tribes. That is quite remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. Numbers mattered
Your voice is a little bit low. Could you speak up just a little bit?
Numbers mattered when it came to negotiating the frontiers, for sure. It's about claiming and it's about keeping, and violence is obviously part of it.
The other thing I was thinking about is when you said that even when after 1763, the treaty, and we had the British section and the Spanish section of what is now the United States, did any of the French soldiers basically resign their commission and end up living permanently with the tribes?
Yeah, so several because part of the treaty was that the French, what used to be the French subjects, will just continue to live normally and become Spanish subjects. But what was interesting to see is how the Spaniards had to rely on the French interpreters, on the French settlers to deal with the Indians, and in this case, the Quapaw. So there was this resistance among the Indians and some of the settlers as well. And so what you would see is the Quapaws and the French are threatening to leave and go someplace else and things like that. There was a moment where a Quapaw chief complained to the governor, saying that they needed to replace the Leyva, who was captain, who was head of the Arkansas Post, and he said, "Oh, first of all, he doesn't speak French, and second of all, he doesn't like us," and things like that. So you can definitely see some of those aspects in secondary sources.
Very interesting. I mean, I was thinking as soon as you started off, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So they absolutely paired up against their common enemy. Let me pull up the question that Jim asked. He asked, which archives have the letters and census records that you shared? Were those the...
So those were from the Archives d'Outre-mer, and that's in Aix-en-Provence. That's 30 kilometers from Marseille. And what the French have done in the most recent years is to gather all the colonial material to that one archive. So if you're studying Louisiana or Vietnam, any French colony, that's the place to go. That's the archives to go.
Are they pretty well advanced as far as digitizing, or do you literally have to go and do research, good old research in the archives?
It's a mixture, and I would say by now probably better than the Spanish archive in Seville. They have some digitized, but at least they would let you take pictures. That's the other thing. So if it's not digitized, I was able to take pictures. But the Spaniards, you can't take pictures, and they're not that far in terms of the digitizing. It's also, I think, a bigger archive as well.
Right. And then it's hard to get copies made. And I mean, I can understand that, it's challenging, I'm sure. And I'm just going to say one last thing. And I know Shelley was going to ask a question too. So the question someone texted me was just the traveling back and forth seems quite unbelievable. The transatlantic travel that many times was that fairly common for soldiers? I mean, usually we think of our soldiers today, going overseas for a deployment, but it seems quite excessive.
It is. I actually had initially a whole section in my presentation about, where he went and where he landed and how long it took, and I had to move on with the presentation. But it is a long trip for sure, and a lot of time they stop in the Caribbean before getting into the mainland. And in terms of for Bossu's second trip, so the one of the reasons he left was health issues for that one time, and although there is no indication of it, but he was in conflict with the governor, with the Garde. In fact, he went to jail once in France. He went to jail for about 6 weeks because of the Garde, and the Garde wanted to strip him from his title and his rank. I'm sorry, and so. It could be also related to the fact that the Garde was to his conflict with the Garde. But also here, he was sent to Alabama, he was sent to St. Louis, he was sent to several places within the area as well. And again, he was disappointed. He didn't go to the places he wanted to go in his mind. This guy is making him go to places he didn't like. He was criticizing him, which earned him the jail time in Paris. Yeah.
Right. Insubordination. I mean, even that day and age, a higher ranking officer is not going to stand for that. So that's understandable. Well, I was just amazed that there was so much, back and forth, and someone else was thinking the same thing, but that's quite remarkable. Shelley, did you have a question too you wanted to put out there?
Yeah, actually, it's a little bit more of a personal question. How did you get interested in Arkansas?
Yes, it's a question that I have to answer more than you can think about. So I think it started with my own personal education travel. So I came to Arkansas. I came to Fayetteville for 1 year as an exchange student from France. And I was interested. I have always been interested in American history, and so I was looking for a topic to work on, and slowly, I found myself not only coming back for a PhD, but also getting more and more involved with Arkansas history. And part of it, of course, was the languages, the ability to use my Spanish and my French in these archives. Was pointed by one of my professors, and then I thought, oh, okay. And my interest in Native American history is also turns out to be related to my own personal experience. I'm a native back in Algeria. I'm a minority, and so some of these experiences were very similar, even though I did not realize it until much later. But I am speaking with Billy Rice, who's she passed recently, but she was the granddaughter of Joseph Griffin, the last full-blood Quapaw chief. And we were talking together, and she's like, "Oh, so your people just like my people. We have all these similarities." So I think it's a combination of luck in a way of ending up in Arkansas instead of Maine or Louisiana. There were two other places for us to go to as students for the study for the exchange. And to the astonishment of many people, they still don't understand why I stayed and but it's a lovely place. It's lovely people, I think. And then the one project after the other, and here we are.
Well, it's intriguing. Yes, that is. We were curious about that, and certainly it's intriguing what other research you've done, which we think would be also fascinating to learn about too. So we'll have to keep tabs on that. And I might have missed it at the beginning, but where are the robes of splendor now? Are they? Where are they housed? In a museum, I suspect, or some?
So yeah, they used to be in Musée de l'Homme in Paris, and then they were moved to Musée du Quai Branly, so a little bit further, closer to the Eiffel Tower. And in 2011, in fact, Alice Walton wanted to bring the robes for the opening of Crystal Bridges. So that's when I did the initial investigation and put them in contact. But unfortunately, she was not successful, and I don't know what happened, but she was not successful in bringing them back once again. But that was the very last time I checked on the robes, and they were at the Musée du Quai Branly.
So they're not in the possession of the Quapaw. I mean, would they ever be repatriated, or that's just not? It's not something political that we talk about, or?
Yeah, I mean, even when I remember a conversation again with Buzz Arnold, and I said, he was the one who brought them in '95, and it took, he knew what it took, and so he said, "Oh, I don't think they will. I don't think it's going to happen." Partly because of insurance and French administration and things like that. So the idea of giving them back to the Quapaw, I think, never never crossed the mind of any French. And I think for them, it's a treasure that belongs to them. It was a gift that was given to them, and as far as they're concerned, they belong to Paris. Yeah.
Understood. Understood. I didn't mean to create an international incident. I was just
I think we
curious.
did.
And so have you actually seen them in person then? You have seen them in person?
Yes, I was.
Wow.
I was lucky. Yes, I was
Wow.
very lucky. Yeah.
Lovely. How lovely. Well, they're beautiful. Absolutely.
Yeah, the colors were astonishing. It's just, yeah.
After that time, all that time, that's wonderful. So obviously they've been well maintained and
Yes,
preserved.
yes,
So that
yes.
is very good. Well, that's wonderful. Shelley, do you have any other questions that have popped up, or?
Nope, no questions on YouTube.
I don't think we have any in the chat either. So I think we are, unless you have something else you'd like to share with us, Sonia, I think we will move on to our wrap up.
I'm pretty good. Thank you so much again.
Well, thank you. This was wonderful. I mean, it's just so interesting. And of course, the Quapaw Quarter Association, we always try to have some presentation associated with the Quapaw tribe. And we've been very fortunate. Betty Gadke, who's a potter for the tribe, did a talk for us a few years ago. And I don't know if you've met her, but she's lovely. And she's, a lot of her art is now at the Saracen Casino. And her, we are always inspired by what she does. And Shelley's a potter, so she's always, interested in techniques and what have you. But nonetheless, we really appreciate that you are joining us tonight. And again, I'm sorry we're not able to be in person, everybody, but hopefully one of these days we'll get back together in person. So thank you again, Sonia. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Before everyone jumps off, I'm just going to remind you of our next preservation conversation. And let me minimize that picture there for a sec so I can look at our image. So our next preservation conversation is going to be on February the 10th, 2022. And our topic is going to be the Murphy Jeffries Building, its history and its future. And we are going to have a panel discussion with Belinda Jeffries, Helen Jeffries, and also Myron and Stephanie Jackson. And of course, if you are a member of the QQA, you know that we worked quite hard to keep that building from getting demolished a few years ago. And so we're thrilled to have the previous owners, the Jeffries associated with the ownership of the property was their father's office. And then of course, Stephanie and Myron Jackson have purchased the building and are working on rehabilitating it, getting it back in service. So that should be a very good presentation. And at this point, obviously, we hope that we can meet in person, but we are just not sure. So it really just depends on the COVID numbers. So just keep your eyes open for emails. Shelley will send out a reminder about the upcoming presentation, and then also on social media, we'll keep everyone informed about what we're going to do. So we hope to meet in person, but we have plan B as always. And know also that at the paint factory, in the mixing room where we meet, they do have the capacity to also live stream it. So even if we do have it in person and we have to limit it to 40 attendees, we can also live stream it. The other thing I was going to mention is we have our members only reception on Sunday, January the 30th, 2022 at the Polk Stanley Wilcox Winchester building. It is at 801 South Spring Street. And again, that is also contingent upon the fact that we can hold it in a safe fashion. So if you're interested in coming, you just need to go to quapaw.com and you can register. It's a free event for members. We just need to have a good number for food and beverage, and also just keep track of folks who are interested in coming so that if we do have to go virtual, we will be able to let you know. So I just want to say again, thank you very much, Sonia, and thank you, Shelley, and thank you all for coming tonight. It was good to kick off the year with this very stimulating discussion. Take care.